Today on Locked On Canadiens, the only thing that stood between the Florida Panthers and finally beating the Montreal Canadiens this season was a weak wrist shot from the point, and then the funniest thing happened.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to episode 1279 of Locked On Canadiens. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day and for subscribing wherever you get your podcast. Doing that supports us here at the show and ensures you don't miss an episode here at Locked On Canadiens. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I know this is your first listen of the day because if you're like me, you probably did not sleep after a game like that. I don't know how you could. A game where the Montreal Canadiens are in the final seconds of the game, still trailing by a goal. And then we just got one of the most magic things we've seen at the Bell Center this year. We'll touch on the game. We have to cover everything that happened in that one. It was an instant classic for the Montreal Canadiens and one that they desperately needed. Looking around the out of town scoreboard, Montreal needed to pick up some kind of points, and boy, did they. We'll talk about the game. We'll talk about how I think Montreal and Florida are kind of stacking up to potentially be, legitimate peers in the Eastern Conference, and why Montreal might have an advantage overall once they get to the height that they are trying to get to. We'll talk about Nick Suzuki's dominance over these last few games, and then want to touch on Jacob Fowler. There's a lot of noise around the Canadiens' prospect goaltender. You always risk with this sort of thing being outdated as soon as you start speaking, but we'll put some thoughts together and try to figure out what's best for the player and what the Canadiens might ultimately want Jacob Fowler to do. But let's start in Montreal. I teased it in the open Tuesday night, on a night where the Canadiens didn't get a bounce. I thought it was funny that this is sort of the Ben Sherratt Bowl, and that this is a team that he played for both teams, and it was sort of funny that every puck that went in behind Sam Montembeault hit a Montreal Canadien first, which is very Ben Sherratt. That was like 90% of the Canadiens' goals against were bouncing in off of Sherratt. Look, they started great. First period was fantastic for the Montreal Canadiens. Yes, they got the bad bounce off of Jake Evans' stick that time, but they were great. They had a really great period. They pushed it to Florida. Second period, they were good to start. It faded away. Florida took a lead into the third period. And then Florida was locking it down. There was no space for Montreal to do anything. Montreal had a power play in the third period, and Florida played one of the most aggressive penalty kills I've seen this season. There was just no room for anybody on the Canadiens to do anything on that play. And look, it's important to recognize that the Florida Panthers are them. They are to me, still the team in the Eastern Conference to topple. That might change. It should, Matthew Tkachuk not come back and be totally healthy. Should, they go down early in that series without Aaron Ekblad, who we know won't return until the third game. Should Sasha Barkov deal with an injury? He missed most of the second period due to some kind of injury. I'm sure the Panthers have some kind of update on that, but maybe not. Maybe they're keeping that a secret because he's dealing with something. Look, all of this culminating in the thought that the Canadiens were down to their last strike, so to speak. Baseball season just started, and they iced the puck on a while they had the net pulled, while they had Montembeault pulled. They had to go back and win a draw in their own zone, which they did. And Slavkovsky has control of the puck behind his own net with about 18 seconds left. They had one shot to go down the ice and get something out of this game. I can't imagine their win percentage was anything higher than 1% at that moment. Instead, what happens, Lane Hutson does what Lane Hutson does. He picks up 3 points in this one, back-to-back 3-point games for Lane Hutson in this one. He passes Chris Chelios in rookie defenseman assists in a single season, and now he is just 3 points away from passing Chelios in points for all-time Canadiens rookie defenseman scoring. Just phenomenal game from him as well. But the puck gets to him at the blue line. He's barely holding it in. He knows that he needs to get something on net. He flicks it towards the net. A Florida Panther, I believe it was Sam Reinhart, goes down in front to block it, and the puck just did Montreal a favor. That's really what we saw in this game. The puck bounced over to a vacant side of the net that was only occupied by Nick Suzuki. He took his time with it. He could have painted a picture of the thing before he put it in the net. I was running around my apartment. I won't lie. Like that was one of those moments for me that this team has the juice, I think. There aren't a lot of like the Islanders aren't doing stuff like that. The Rangers aren't doing stuff like that. Columbus isn't doing stuff like that. That was incredible from Nick Suzuki to be there, right place, right time, but also to just decide the game's over. I found that to be way more telling than the tying goal. You needed the tying goal to get there, but Suzuki took the puck in overtime and he just decided the game was over. Something that Montreal has not had a lot of those kinds of players. I'll say in the last 20 years or so. Cole Caulfield's one of them. He's up there in game-winning goals, but Suzuki just takes it wide, swings around, buries it. The Panthers never touched the puck in overtime, which seems to be the Canadiens' really their only strategy in overtime, come to think of it, is let's just win the draw. Christian Dvorak is worth every penny, just going out there and winning the draw at center and then immediately getting off the ice. I thought Cole Caulfield showed great restraint in overtime, taking that puck to the middle and then not shooting it because it wasn't a perfect, clean shot. And if you take that shot and you miss, well, now they're going back the other way. You've gifted them a possession. He showed a lot of restraint in not firing that puck. And instead, circling back, Nick Suzuki, I don't know who needs to see this or hear this, but the guy is an elite player. He's an elite first-line center. He's one of the most potent centers in the National Hockey League. There's no more denying it. We've talked about it this season. People who watch this show and people who watch this team know that Nick Suzuki is legit, that there is no more denying this player. And I desperately want to see him get into the playoffs and continue to prove people wrong and continue to show that he can do that. I want to talk about the matchup between him and Barkov in the second segment, because I think it goes to show that there's a lot more riding on this matchup, not only just in who determines the outcome of the game we just watched, but in how these two teams play and are coached against one another in the future. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. Look, Montembeault was sharp. He got lucky. He got very unlucky and also very lucky at the same time. The two goals that against were deflections that went in behind him. There was one goal that was disallowed because it was a wrist shot from the point. Stop me if you've heard this before. Montembeault just did not see it, and it hit the goalpost behind him, and then it was kicked into the net by Greer. The referee on the ice made the call right immediately. They reviewed it, still got it right. So Sam Montembeault gets a get out of jail free card on that one. But the credit to the Canadiens player in front of the net who took away Greer's stick and made sure that couldn't go in. Imagine the different swing in this game if instead of being tied in that moment, Florida now has a lead in the first period. The lead that Florida took into the third was the first and only lead the Panthers had against the Canadiens all season, which is, again, I just find it so funny. I talked about it both with Scott at the beginning of the week and with Armando Velez of Locked On Panthers yesterday, in that the Panthers just seem to be the Canadiens' get-right team this year. And a lot of the stats from this year are going to look very silly. In 4 games against the Panthers, Montreal took all 8 points, and the Panthers only got 1. They got 1 out of 8 points against the Montreal Canadiens. If the Panthers are looking back at this season and they have to play Tampa in the first round because they do not get, or maybe Toronto in the first round because they do not get that first overall in the division. This is sort of a series they'll look back on and say, man, we should have gotten more points from them. Because while the Canadiens are shaping up to be a playoff team, it's a little different considering that, Florida should have beaten them in a lot of these games. Montreal's effort was great in a lot of them, don't get me wrong, but I think this will be a series Florida regrets should they fall in the first round to an opponent that they have to face because they didn't get enough points in the regular season. The game matters especially more because Nashville did not do Montreal any favors against the Columbus Blue Jackets. They got blown out in that game, as a matter of fact. So heading into overtime, or I should say even before that, before the game was even tied, if Montreal did not pick up any points, Columbus would have passed Montreal and taken that final wildcard spot, because Columbus would have had an extra game left and they would have been tied in points, which would have put Columbus in. Now Montreal keeps pace with them, which they need to do. They put distance between them and the Rangers. There's now 2 points of a gap there, and I believe it's a 5-point gap between them and Detroit and the Islanders. It's just we are thinning the herd a little bit here. There's only, I believe, 8 games left after this one. We're going to have to see how this shapes out. But look, Montreal plays like they did in this one, and they get more moments like they did on Nick Suzuki's tying goal and winning goal, for what it's worth. I like their chances more than any of those other teams. All right, we're going to step aside for a second. When we come back, I want to talk about the matchup with Florida and potentially looking into the future to see what this looks like in 3 or 4 years. And maybe we're looking at a playoff series between these two teams sooner rather than later. And we'll get into all that in just a minute. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the most high protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack if I'm at my desk or if I'm running around my apartment celebrating a Nick Suzuki goal. It's a lot easier to do that. I especially like the different varieties of the no shells, like the sea salt and vinegar and the chili roasted. Those are my favorites. But if you love cracking into every shell for that satisfying crunch, don't worry, they have not forgot about you. The in-shell options are always a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, we are back. And we're going to take a look at, the season series that was for the Canadiens. And really, I want to key in on a matchup. Not just a matchup between these two teams, but a matchup between two players. The two captains of these teams. It's funny how that often works out. Alexander Barkov and one Nick Suzuki. It was obvious to me, and Marty had said as much in the past. He started the Nick Suzuki line in both games against the Florida Panthers because he wanted to get the matchup between Nick Suzuki and Alex Barkov. In the home game, I should say, the one that preceded Tuesday's game, that was not possible because the Panthers saw that the Canadiens were starting the Nick Suzuki line, and Paul Maurice wanted nothing to do with it. He wanted Barkov away from Nick Suzuki, so he gave him a steady dose of Anton Lindell when he could. I did find it funny that the Canadiens, at least by the eye test, Suzuki was playing much better against the Barkov line when they got that matchup than the Lundell line. But it goes to show that other teams determine what your best players are, in a sense. If Paul Maurice has the last change and he wants to get his star player against, somebody not named Nick Suzuki. Nick Suzuki is the best player on the ice for the Montreal Canadiens. So she's trying to avoid that matchup. And for good reason. I mean, I think historically, the Canadiens, when Suzuki and Barkov are on the ice, the Canadiens have cooked Florida this season. They scored a bunch earlier. Nick Suzuki has game-winning goals against the Florida Panthers in both of these games in the home and home. It's nice to see that, Nick Suzuki is not only chipping in offensively, but that he is a threat defensively that the Panthers wanted to avoid. It's thinking, think back to the run to the Cup final. It was Deno was getting a steady matchup of, Matthews and Marner against the Leafs. And then, in the Winnipeg series, it was Scheifele and Wheeler, that he was able to dominate those matchups when he was able to. The fact that the Panthers want to try to avoid that matchup, I think speaks volumes about the player Nick Suzuki is. And I think it kind of, at least to me, it makes me wonder if these two teams were to face each other in the first round of the playoffs. Now, granted, the Panthers are a lot different of a team with Matthew Tkachuk, with Aaron Ekblad. It's you cannot deny that they are a different looking team right now. But the fact that in this regular season series, Paul Maurice was worried about getting his top line out on the ice against the Canadiens' top line. If I'm a Panthers fan, I'm kind of concerned because you should cook them, right? Like that shouldn't be. You're the Florida Panthers. You're the reigning Stanley Cup champion. You're the back-to-back Eastern Conference champion. That shouldn't really concern you. And yet it seems like it played a big part in this home and home series between Florida and Montreal. So I look forward to the years from now where these guys are going to meet each other in the playoffs. Let's talk really briefly about Florida Panthers hockey. And I know a lot of folks were getting very mad about the officiating late in the game, especially the second half of the game. I thought it was funny, and I think Andrew Berkshire of the Game Over Network pointed this out, that it's funny how in the first half of the game where the Canadiens were territorially the better team, the whistles were away, and then suddenly the Panthers are getting back in the game and the whistles go and the whistles come out and they get every whistle. And there's a lot of really soft calls that shouldn't really, have an impact on a game that ultimately do. The Panthers scored a power play goal in this game. Sam Bennett took away a power play for Florida by being a dummy. So, to mention all that is to say, if you want this team to make the playoffs this year, get used to it. That is going to be how playoff games are played, man. I don't know if Canadiens fans have, if a lot of folks have watched the playoffs the last few years without Montreal in them. This is kind of the recipe. This is kind of what you're going to have to learn how to play through. It's why I like the Panthers so much to repeat, is because no one does that better than them. No one, can turn a game into a street fight like them and come out the other side the better team. They have the horses for it. I worry that the Canadiens at this point in their build do not, especially without Arbor Xhekaj in the lineup. But the Canadiens, even in this game, decided they didn't want to get into the Nico Mikkola shenanigans. But I think that if you're watching this team and hoping they make the playoffs, which I think 100% of us are to this point, games like this one are what you're rooting for better or worse. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to be, Chris Lee disaster classes, but the odds are there that they will be poorly officiated. They always are. The calls don't come. And I think of a team like Washington, who Montreal is, if the Canadiens are to make the playoffs, their most likely opponent would be the Washington Capitals to this point. And I wonder, can the Capitals do that to the same level as the Panthers? Probably not, but they're probably still pretty good at it. Tom Wilson can be, if there was a Florida Panther on the Washington Capitals, it's Tom Wilson, who is both offensively gifted and a pain in the butt. Pierre-Luc Dubois is kind of a monster to play against for that same reason. Big, physical. He knows the line and he toes it and sometimes steps over it because he knows he can get away with it. The Canadiens have to find that in them. They have to find the line. And that's what's hard for young teams. That's why oftentimes we downplay their ability to play in the playoffs because they don't know where that line is. We always talk about the pick play, right? The blatant interference that often goes uncalled. The Panthers are the kings of that. They're so good at it. And I don't say that as whining. I say that as get good at it, Montreal, because that's how you're winning in the playoffs. I think you need to look at a team like the Florida Panthers and how you beat them 4 times and realize that that's what you're going to have to do every night should you make the postseason. So look, I'm very much looking forward to these two teams going at it over the next, few years while the Panthers window is still open, while the Canadiens starts to open itself. Especially because Montreal is getting reinforcements. I would love to see how Ivan Demidov adds to this, how a guy like David Reinbacher adds to this, how whoever Montreal is going to add this summer with all the cap space and assets that they have adds to this kind of really budding rivalry. We give Gary Bettman a lot of crap. Full pause there. It's deserved most of the time. But I do think that the divisional format and sort of how, if you're constantly playing in your division in the playoffs, that's how you build those rivalries. Montreal and Florida don't need to build one should they ever meet in the playoffs. Like, they've got it. These guys don't like each other. Montreal knows the kind of team that Florida is, and they've gotten the better of them because they're able to play with them. They're able to play that game too. The playoffs are a different beast, though. So, like, if you're upset about the officiating, if you're upset about how Florida takes liberties with their opponents, get used to it, because every good team in the playoffs is going to do that. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to getting very upset at the Chris Lees and the Wes McCaulleys of the world who decide to make it about themselves. All right, we're going to step aside one more time, and when we come back, we will talk about a few Canadians who may be joining the roster in a moment. I mentioned them on the last episode, but primarily Jacob Fowler and whether or not he is going to be a Montreal Canadien or Laval Rocket in the immediate future. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Ever check your bank account and wonder where did all your money go? Trust me, I've been there. Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's really easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you just stop managing your money, and now you start building wealth. I started using Monarch to get a better grasp on my spending. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. It's a big one for me. Spoiler alert, it was a lot. Now I budget smarter, and I save even more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, from credit card apps to banking apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track your shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without any other stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, fourth line shift time. This is don't get in trouble, get the puck in deep, wait for Laura to come back time. We've seen some movement on the Jacob Fowler file when it comes to his college career, when it comes to whether or not that's over and it's time for him to come to Montreal. There was a report earlier in the week that it was imminent. He was going to be signing with either the Canadiens to end the season and sign his ELC, or sign a professional tryout with Laval and have his ELC start next year. There was also some rumors that floated around that said, I believe it was Cam Robinson who pointed out that there's word that maybe he goes back to Boston College for one more year, which would be his junior season in the NCAA. I think, as much as I think he doesn't have anything to prove in Boston College in the NCAA, so much as he probably wants to win a championship there. It's a bad taste in his mouth this time around that he wasn't able to get it. I'm sure that group feels like there's some unfinished business, considering they fell to a team that they had beaten the previous year in Denver. But I don't know that I necessarily see a reason for him to sign his pro deal right now. I just looking at how the net shapes out, right? Is he going to start in Montreal if he were to start this season or next season? No, he's not. It's Sam Montembeau's net. We know that. Unless they get another 1A option, it's Montembeau's net. Is he going to back up Sam Montembeau? Probably not. It's probably Jakub Dobish's job, or the Canadiens find an improvement there. It's tough to know that Jacob Fowler, I almost call him Jakub Fowler because we were just saying Jakub Dobish. Jacob Fowler. It would be tough to imagine he's an immediate improvement at the backup position. And if you're the Canadiens, do you want him playing the backup position? Probably not. You probably want him playing games. Is he the starter in Laval? That's where it gets interesting. Right now, no, I don't think he is. Caden Primo has more than earned that spot heading into the Calder Cup playoffs. I'm excited to see what he does, not only for his future as a potential Montreal Canadiens goaltending option, but just for the guy's career, right? Like he's had an up and down career. It's hard. It's tough for goalies to find their footing. He was rushed into the NHL, which is a cautionary tale for getting Fowler here as early as possible. Not to say they're the same player, but we all thought that Caden Primo was the next one as well, and that hasn't shaped out, at least in a linear fashion. I just don't know if the Canadiens, what they want to see from Caden Primo. He's, I believe, a restricted free agent at the end of the year, Caden Primo, and do they sign him and go into the offseason and into the training camp next year, thinking there's a goaltending battle for that second or for the I almost said second chair, the backup position behind Sam Montembeault? I don't know, but I also don't think that Jacob Fowler plays into that very much because Jakob Dobish is going to be here as well. You'll have a starter in Laval and you'll have a backup in Montreal, and you can sort of do what they did this year and interchange them should that be needed. The problem is Caden Primo's waiver eligibility. So if you don't think you can get Caden Primo through waivers, which I'll be honest, at this point, it's probably quite difficult next year. Should he especially go on a deep run in the Calder Cup playoffs, should they sign him and try to waive him to Laval, that's probably going to be difficult to sneak him through waivers. I keep saying that I just feel in my bones that he is going to be the Flyers option in net next year because it's name recognition. He's Keith's kid, Keith Primo. And who's in net for Philadelphia? Like Fedotov and Urson have just not been good enough. And I think maybe that team just wants a fresh start in net. I know those are young guys as well, but at some point they have to start making progress, and it's hard to do that when they're giving up as many goals as they've given up because of their goaltending. So the whole thing is in flux. It wouldn't surprise me to see, Fowler go back to BC for a year and just kind of watch the current situation in Montreal develop a little bit more. If Caden Primo, if they decide that if he doesn't want to stay in Montreal and they decide to move on from him, you can find an AHL backup, or an AHL starter if you don't believe Connor Hughes can do it, because he's also played a bunch this year, some promising play, but again, a very young goaltender in Laval. So there's a lot of goaltending options here. It's funny, last year I feel like all we did was talk about the 3 goalie system, and this year there's been none of that, but it seems like we're headed in that direction with whatever Jacob Fowler decides to do, and whatever the Canadiens deem is best for the player. If he wants to go back to BC, I doubt the Canadiens are going to argue it. I would imagine that he is, he's in control of this decision, and the Canadiens have a plan either way. They have to. The other player I want to briefly mention is Oliver Kapanen. I keep saying Kapanen, but I believe he pronounces it Kapanen. So Oliver Kapanen is on his way over to North America following his season ending with Timrå. They fell in the playoffs to Frölunda. But in a series where I thought Kapanen was playing quite well. He was playing big minutes for that team. And I wonder, Michael Pezzetta's pretty decent game notwithstanding on Tuesday, I wonder if he's a better option on the fourth line for the Montreal Canadiens at this point. And maybe gives them another option to, roll up the lineup should they need more offense up front. I think Heineman's been great on the second line, but maybe there comes a time where you go, maybe Kapanen can take that shift instead of Heineman. And maybe you want to reunite Heineman on the fourth line, because I thought Armia and Evans were starting to pick their game up, and maybe you want to rebuild that line at some point, especially heading into the playoffs, where you're going to want as much continuity from the regular season as possible to try to build on. I think, Kapanen is a real interesting option for Montreal at this point. I know they said that he would go to Laval when he came over, but they, I believe, should have the right to change their mind after watching what's unfolded in Montreal and watching how he played down the stretch into the playoffs with Timrå. It's sort of, it might have changed their mind. It might have forced their hand, so to speak. So we'll see how that unfolds. I'm sure we'll pick up some news between now and next week and figure out where exactly Kapanen will be playing. All right. Trivia makes its triumphant return in this episode. Thanks for the patience in waiting on that. It was difficult to sort of coordinate between the guest shows that I was having. So we're back. We are so back with trivia. And this one is Nick Suzuki themed. With his 17th career game-winning goal, Nick Suzuki is now tied with these 5 players in all-time Montreal Canadiens game-winning goals. So this isn't just overtime winners. This is game winners at any point in the game if it is the deciding goal. He now has 17 of them, and he is tied with these 5 players all-time in the history of the Montreal Canadiens. If you have the answer, put it in the comments down below this video. Send it to us via email, lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. Any way you know how to get in touch with us, we will record those answers and give you a shout out on the next episode of the show. Whew. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Canadiens. What a night. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every day part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter with local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also available on Amazon Fire TV. On your free Fire TV channels app, click the Montreal Canadiens logo in the hockey section, and you can watch all of our episodes there as well. It's another way, if that's how you consume your media, we will meet you there. You can find the show, Locked On Canadiens, just about everywhere we're posting: Bluesky, Instagram, TikTok. You can also email us, lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. We do a mailbag every Friday episode, so get those in by Thursday, and we'll read them out on the show and give you our thoughts. We always appreciate that. It is my favorite part of the week. You can find me on the internet at Maybe It's Ian. You can find Laura at The Active Stick. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow.